we go. All right, so this is our second recorded video for Objectivist Video Chats. I'm Jennifer Lechner, and I'm here with Kai and Michael and Robert, and our topic today is The Fountainhead. The Fountainhead is Ayn Rand's second novel, and it is my favorite novel of all. Some people prefer Atlas Shrugged. I personally prefer The Fountainhead. So we are just going to talk about The Fountainhead. However the conversation goes is fine by me. I'll start out with a brief description, and anyone who wants to jump in afterwards is welcome to do so. Fountainhead was written in 1943, I believe. It's about an architect who's starts out the novel being kicked out of the School of Architecture for basically insubordination, for designing things the way he wants to design them. And you show his progression as from the beginning of his career to the end of the novel. It's the theme of individualism, of staying true to your vision. It's about basically, she says it's about basically it's about individualism in men's souls, as opposed to The Fountainhead, where it's individualism in the realm of politics. And my personal opinion is I think The Fountainhead is a more profound, better written novel than Atlas Shrugged, even though Atlas Shrugged is grander and we can get into the Atlas Shrugged in other videos. But anyway, anyone want to jump in?
I can say that I agree with you that the novel is about individualism. I think it's like maybe the best pro-individualist novel ever. And it's maybe worth noting that at this time, Ayn Rand was actually starting off in 1943 to write philosophy, like a couple years before and a couple years after. And she wanted her philosophy initially as individualism. I would simply describe The Fountainhead as my favorite novel.
Uh-oh, you froze up.
And looks like you're still there anyway.
Oh, I'm sorry.
You froze up for about 30 seconds there.
Oh,
Yeah,
okay.
The last thing that came through is you said
I'm sorry about that.
Novel.
I guess. Yes, my favorite novel, and I think it's stunningly well written. I think it's very precise. I know that Nathaniel Brennan at one point said he almost memorized the novel, and that's almost true of me for the first couple of years. I think it's got great conversations, and it's got great characterizations which come alive a little bit more realistically than Atlas Shrugged. So it's my favorite novel in the world.
All right, Michael, what do you
Jennifer,
think?
why would you say it's more profound? What do you mean? How do you mean by that?
I think it goes deeper into the issues of I think it's more profound in the sense that Atlas Shrugged tends to float. Let's see. It's a good question, and I'm not sure exactly how to answer it off the top of my head. I think that The Fountainhead is more focused. My brain's not working very, very well right now, but I think
that happens to me too. Yeah.
Yeah, bad timing for something like that, right? But I think.
Sorry.
So I'm not
coming. Questions to ask.
No, that's the perfect question to ask, and I'm just not thinking straight. But I think that it would. I'm not going to come up with a good answer right now, so I'll just pass on this.
Then.
Well, it might be profound in the sense that it teaches the individual how to be happy and how to be dynamic and how to be heroic.
Mm-hmm.
I think that was an ideal man as Ayn Rand tried to create him. And so, at least by implication, he teaches a lot very profoundly how to be individualist and loyal to yourself and have massive integrity and lead your own life in your own way. So in that sense, it's kind of a better guide to life than Atlas Shrugged.
Yeah, what I would say, I think I see what you're saying, and I would agree with that in this way. People will read Ayn Rand's books and say, "Oh, this changed everything for me." And I think what happens is you read The Fountainhead, and a common reaction is, "Well, this changed my life." And you read Atlas Shrugged, and the common reaction is, "This changed my understanding of the world." Mm-hmm. And that to me is the difference. And for me personally, it's a subtle difference, because all of the good stuff that's in The Fountainhead is in Atlas Shrugged, and all the good stuff in Atlas Shrugged can at least be extrapolated out of The Fountainhead. So the Fountainhead is more specific to a person and living your life, and Atlas Shrugged does that, but it's also more about, this is what explains not just you, but the world and people in society, and why the world is what it is and what happens in the world. Whereas The Fountainhead is all about you. It's all about the individual. This, and I want to be more like this, or I understand more about myself because of this.
Go ahead, sorry.
No, I was just going to say that's why I think a lot of people identify with it more. It's more identifiable in that way.
That makes sense in terms of some of the themes. Of course, this is just a hypothesis. Not to say it's like true. I'd have to think about it more or ask some experts on the literature, but it seems like, yeah, if the Fountainhead is more about individualism, there might be more focus on the individuals in the novel. And it's at one stage in her writing. Atlas being more philosophical, the characters be more abstract. And I've heard some objectivist lecturers in years past, if I remember correctly, say that, point out how some of the characters in Rand's work, I guess, especially like in Atlas, would be more like some of the concretized abstractions or the way characters were in ancient Greece.
That's true.
A different kind of literature. With the classical literature, you've got a different kind of writing. And it's more like an archetype that they're writing about. And so in Atlas, we got more archetypes, and we're not used to that. Mm-hmm. If we knew more about literature, that archetype thing might be more natural to us. But in our culture, with naturalism, I guess, we're so used to individual characters. And that might be one thing that's coming into play in our context.
Thing you could say about Howard Rourke is that he is very abstract. I think that the character that came before him, Leo, in the novel We the Living, was more realistic, and you could relate to him as a person. I think Howard Rourke is very, very cold, very socially isolated, and he really is kind of a stylized person that is not completely realistic. And I think Ayn Rand deliberately made him not very realistic, but he's still heroic through the roof.
I think he's warm. I don't think he's cold.
I think
is that right? Okay.
He changes quite a bit through the novel. He starts out being completely isolated, completely alone. But as he goes through life, like the right people end up sticking to him. He starts he strikes up these conversations with Mike, the construction worker, and they become friends. They're friends throughout the novel. He picks up Stephen Mallory, Dominique, of course, Roger Enright. He picks up all these people along the way, and of course, he ends up being best friends with Gail Wynand, who is like his polar opposite in terms of what they're actually doing with their lives. But they're such a soul match that they end up becoming best friends. And like he actually progresses quite a bit through the novel. Like he ends up being completely naive, completely isolated. He ends the novel figuring things out. He figures out the principle behind the dean. It takes him couple decades, I think. I think he's in his mid-30s or 40 or something by the time he's, with Gail Wynand, and he finally has the time to think this stuff out. He's with Gail Wynand on the yacht. He's got like a couple months off from work for the first time in his life. He's able to think these issues through, and he figures out that he figures out all of these things that had been haunting him, but he hadn't had the time to think through. Like he starts out with just his own instincts, and then he figures out the principles behind his instincts, as opposed to, say, Peter Keating's instincts later on. And so that all accumulates in the courtroom speech. And the novel ends with him having people around him and having an incredible career and being philosophically integrated. So he actually is not just this statue that is pushed through the novel. He actually does evolve and improve in quite a few ways.
Well, that's all true. I hadn't quite thought of it that way, but he did start off very abstract. I agree with everything you said, Jennifer. He does develop and become much more warm and rounded over time.
Part of it is, like a lot of things, it's just your personal reaction to some things. So focusing on certain things, I can understand. It makes sense how someone might think the person's cold and another the warm. I'm thinking about when I first read it, talking to the dean and diving into the lake and enjoying the lake and the sun and all that. And that's not really what I regard as a cold person. Mm-hmm. Things like that. There's just some examples.
Yeah. I would recommend this, and not necessarily to y'all, but I would recommend this since you're making this public and putting it on YouTube. The next time folks read The Fountainhead, next time you crack open the book, or even if you just are going to spend some serious time thinking about it, but especially if you're going to read it again, read it with an eye to how incredibly passionate Howard Rourke is, how joyous Howard Rourke is.
Anne's not angry. Everyone gets angry. She isn't angry, but joy. Sorry.
Howard Rourke is almost never angry. He's almost never outraged. He is the most joyous character you've ever seen in literature, and people miss that because in regard to other people, sometimes he seems very stoic. He's not stoic. It's just that they don't register. They don't get to him unless they're of value to him. The story opens with this man naked, laughing.
Really vulnerable.
Read the whole rest of the book, remembering that this is a man you met naked and laughing.
Yeah, sorry.
Good point.
Oh, go ahead.
Yeah. Very good. I like that.
I don't think the story makes sense. I don't think The Fountainhead makes any sense at all until you realize that Howard Rourke is joyful and passionate.
And as you say,
no, I'm sorry. Go ahead.
At the beginning, right? Like, just the fact that he's nude means he's vulnerable, open. Hadn't looked at it like that before, but of course, when I first read it, I was like, "What, freaking 18 or something?" So what the hell do you expect?
Yeah. and if you watch for, and the reason I say do this when you read it again, is because if you watch for it in reading it, I can't tell you how many times you'll say, "Oh, I kind of missed that. I kind of missed that." He's distracted by a drawing or an idea, and he can't resist picking up a piece of paper. He can't resist touching the building that they're building that he designed. He can't, the construction workers are like, this guy's in love with this thing. He can't keep his hands off of it. There are so many places where his passion just comes out. And Ayn Rand doesn't talk about it in those terms. She wants she wants to tell you what happens and have you understand what's going on psychologically. But Howard Rourke is the most passionate, value-oriented man, maybe even more than the characters of Atlas Shrugged. He's a joyful person. He can't even help but laugh when, Dominique is telling him, I can be with you if you can give up everything that you value in life. Uh-huh. And when he meets her in Ohio. And this happens over and over again. Howard Rourke laughed And, the story begins and ends with the words Howard Rourke. And in the beginning, he's laughing and naked. And at the end, he's, in his full triumph. But the point, and the whole secret of Howard Rourke's character is he triumphs throughout the book. He's not unhappy in the quarry.
So
He's an amazingly ferocious character. He's like the most single-minded, determined, heroic, ferocious character ever. But he does it very quietly, so that's why perhaps you can miss it.
So on the subject of
ferocity is sounds. I'm sorry. Go ahead.
On the subject of him starting out the novel nude, it's like this is the moment of his birth. We don't hear anything at all about his childhood or how he was raised or anything really. But it's like this is the moment when he is born. He is born here on the cliff, and he is born laughing. He's not born crying. He's born laughing, and he's looking out he's looking out on the untouched earth. And he's thinking about what he's going to do with it. And then the novel ends with him also on a pinnacle on top of the building, looking at what he has done with the earth. Only he's not nude anymore. He's got his wife Dominique coming up to greet him. And that's the progression of the novel from one peak to the other.
Yeah, and Ayn Rand pays tribute to volition in both of the great novels, to free will. And she does a great job explaining why Gale Winan has the, call it baggage that he has. She does a great job explaining, Ellsworth Toohey had this bitter desire to get power he would never otherwise have achieved right from his youth, from a little kid. But Howard Rourke doesn't, there's nothing he falls back on. There's nothing he relies on. He chooses his path. It's a tribute to volition. That this is a man he's self-made. And I think that, I don't know if that was conscious, but in a sense, I think it was intentional.
That's really interesting that we get all of this backstory for Ellsworth Toohey, the villain, and all this backstory for Gale Winan, the major tragic character. We get a tiny bit for Dominique. I think we got one story about when she was jumping over a hedge when she was a kid, and it was really joyful, and her father really remembered that. And that's about it. That's all we hear about Dominique, and we hear nothing at all about Howard Rourke.
Yeah, the Dominique it's you're right. It's so brief and it's so tragic because it's a friend of the family. Isn't that Dominique about whom he says, she has this great capacity for joy. What will she do in a world with so little place for it?
I think one thing that strikes me about one thing that sort of relates to what you're saying is that the story is told. I think in almost a unique way. It's very stylized in all kinds of ways, including language. And I even think it contrasts sharply with, let's say, We the Living, which was written in kind of a normal way. But Ayn Rand deliberately wrote, I think, in a new way. And I had the same experience as many other people. When I first read the novel, I read it's a 700-page novel. I read about 110 pages, and then I said, "Wait a minute, I'm not really following along. I'm not really getting it." So I went back to read it a second time, and then I was paying attention, and I did understand it. It's because ultimately, even though people don't notice it, don't say it too much, she deliberately, in my opinion, wrote in a very stylized, quietly shocking manner.
It is extraordinary writing, and one of the great things about both of those novels is how you can reread them and it seems fresh and you've got new insights you didn't get the first time.
I think her novel is one of these rare novels where when you read it the second time, it's better than the first time around. The one novel which I've read, which goes beyond it, is called The Three Stigmata by Palmer Eldritch, by this famous science fiction writer called Philip K. Dick. And his it's not exactly the same thing, but his novel is so hard to read the first time, even though it's not obvious why it is, that when you read it the second time, it's kind of like ecstasy. And The Fountainhead almost equals that. I mean, I thought the second time I read it, it was fantastic. Although,
that's good.
The one novel which is the best the second time around is still this classic novel by Philip K. Dick.
Well,
So
we'd be taking notes, but I'll be watching the recording later.
sure thing. So
It's a great novel. It should be read.
it took me quite a few readings of the Fountainhead before I could figure out a lot of what was going on, because a lot of, for one thing, Dominique was completely opaque to me. Like, it was really hard for me to understand her motivation. And then some, like, the dialogue between her and Tui was really thick to me. I don't remember how many times it took me to read and understand that, but it took me quite a while to understand their motivations clearly enough before I could understand how they were bantering off of each other and kind of, goading each other, like how Tui was trying to get her to do his bidding, but she saw right through him, but she played along anyway. Just very, very interesting stuff. And just like, nobody writes dialogue like Ayn Rand. It's so, as you said, it's so stylized.
Correct.
And it's so essentialized and just potent. It's just really potent to read how her characters interact with each other. And yeah, like, every time I read it,
She's like the Quentin Tarantino of novels.
oh,
Sorry.
Interesting. There's an idea in mindfulness, and you see it in memes and stuff. This idea that when words leave your mouth, what if you could see them? What if they were written? What if they were, and you couldn't take them back? And the idea is to be more conscious of what you say. And Ayn Rand's characters speak as if they're aware of that. They speak as if their words are going to be on a printed page. And I must admit, when I read a book like The Fountainhead or any good literature, it makes me wish that more of us would do that mindfulness exercise of saying, the words that I say matter. They don't matter much.
Well, Ayn Rand
Maybe they're casual.
Ayn Rand explicitly said people should speak in a stylized manner, much more so. And she was kind of teaching us a lesson, because clearly her characters in these novels speak in that manner. And I agree with Jennifer. No one writes dialogue like she does. And I love it when someone like Ellsworth Toohey and Dominique Franken have their stylized arguments. And the same thing in Atlas Shrugged. It's just very, very powerful dialogue in which you see people compete. And that's like the part, those are my favorite parts, when I see two people clashing in that manner.
Yeah, you're right. You saw that in like older films. The kind of dialogue that there's no wasted words, there's no softening
That's
touches
true.
to make it more natural. It's funny, especially you mentioned Dominique and Ellsworth Toohey, listening to their dialogue, or reading their dialogue. It's like watching an old style sword fight, where there's a lot of
Yes.
repartee. It's not about who kills each other first. It's part of the value of the conversation is the conversation itself. And yeah, I love that.
What are
Yes.
some movies like that?
Oh, when I think of the old style films, Captain Blood, Errol Flynn films, even Cyrano de Bergerac and the sword fight there. And
Yeah.
Cyrano de
Those
Bergerac,
movies made by the Coen brothers also have very stylized dialogue. It's almost like Ayn Rand could have been writing for them, or they could have been writing for her. I'd like to see them try and adopt one of her novels and convert them into movies.
yeah.
I wonder if they could bring out the benevolence, though.
The We the Living
Yeah,
movie, the Italian We the Living movie from the 40s, that also has really great dialogue. I have actually not been able to read all the way through We the Living myself, but the movie was really incredible. And when Kira and Leo first meet each other, the way they talk to each other is just mind blowing. It's like, wow.
They did what should have been done. What should have been done with the three Atlas Shrugged films. What would have made those films easily, I can't guess how many times better than they were. What would have made those films great, even with the so-so acting and sets and money and all the limitations, is if they had actually used the dialogue from the book. I can't tell you how many times they put dialogue out there that didn't accomplish anything different than the book. It didn't make up for any plot differences or any of them. All it did was modernize it and make it sound more naturalistic. And there were so many fantastic lines. Well, you know how Ayn Rand writes dialogue. There was just no reason for it. It's hard to believe it wasn't malice.
You know, there was a
Yeah.
in I think the art of fiction, she gave this one lesson where she rewrote the first dialogue between Peter Keating and Howard Roark, where they're talking
Yeah, that's a
and they're talking about Howard, what do you think I should do with my career? And Howard's like, well, and Howard says, why are you asking me? That's how can you not know? How can you stand not knowing? So they've got this incredible dialogue going on. She as a lesson, she rewrites it in a naturalistic way, and it completely decimates Howard Roark's character. He is not nearly the same person. He's like, oh well, thanks for asking my opinion. Well, here's what I think, and it's completely wrong. It changes absolutely everything, and it's really eye-opening.
How do you always know the right thing to do? Oh, I don't know. I guess I just yeah, that's also reprinted in the Romantic Manifesto. Folks should look that up if they haven't seen it before.
Yeah.
And it's brilliant. But yeah, the dialogue is just fantastic in both senses of the word. It's wonderful, but it's almost fantasy. It's so good, and it's not even that I think it's detached from life. It's more I wish more of life was like that.
Yeah.
I wish to be more like that. I wish that if somehow my words were coming out of my mouth in a visible form, that they were worth reading. And that's a challenge because you don't want it to be artificial. You actually want that to be the clarity of your conversation and the clarity ultimately of your thought. So, I give it my best shot.
Yeah, you have to try and make the dialogue both very stylized and artistic, and yet realistic. And it's hard to do both at the same time. But she did it consistently throughout her entire life, and she's got tons of great dialogue in the Fountainhead.
Yeah, and it's not artificial. I was going to say it's not emotionless. On my podcast the other night, we read Peter Keating's Confession to Katie. Speaking of the Fountainhead, if we've got a minute,
the last one at the end.
if you wouldn't mind, I'd like to go ahead and read it because I've still got the page marked.
Yeah, absolutely. So just as a warning, I've got something saying I've got 4 minutes left. So if it goes over, I'll just start a new one. We'll do a part 2.
Okay.
Okay. That may be a bluff on their part because, they keep saying that they'll extend it, but maybe this time they mean it.
Maybe.
It's
You, Jennifer.
Yeah, we'll see.
So it's one of those passages it's hard to read without getting a little choked up because, Keating had jilted Katie twice, and at this point she's just become cold to it. But she's not even angry. She's just oblivious. She's just wiped out her soul. And Keating's trying to get through to the girl she used to be. Katie, for 6 years I thought about how I'd ask your forgiveness someday. And now I have the chance, but I won't ask. It seems besides the point. I know it's horrible to say that, but that's how it seems to me. It's the worst thing I ever did in my life. But not because I hurt you. I did hurt you, Katie, and maybe more than you know yourself. But that's not my worst guilt. Katie, I wanted to marry you. It was the only thing I ever really wanted. And that's the sin that can't be forgiven. That I hadn't done what I wanted. It feels so dirty and pointless and monstrous as one feels about insanity. Because there's no sense to it, no dignity, nothing but pain and wasted pain. Katie, why do they always teach us that it's easy and evil to do what we want and that we need to discipline to restrain ourselves? It's the hardest thing in the world to do what we want, and it takes the greatest kind of courage. I mean, what we really want. And it takes, as I wanted to marry you, not as I want to sleep with some woman or get drunk or get my name in the papers. Those things, they're not even desires. They're things people do to escape from desires because it's such a big responsibility to really want something. And, I read that and, it's incredibly tragic at the end of their story. But then it also makes me think of so many of the objections to objectivism, that it's cold or passionless, or that Ayn Rand didn't get human struggle and human challenge, and how weaknesses are difficult to overcome. And I think of Ben Shapiro's discussions with Yarrow and Brooke, claiming that, well, selfishness doesn't work because a selfish man will sleep with the first woman he sees at the bar. And this is the answer to that. That's not selfish. That's not what you really want. It's the hardest thing in the world to do what you really want.
That's a really extraordinary bit of self-awareness from Peter Keating, because he goes through so much of the novel being stupidly unaware of what's going on in his own head. And it seems like he's actually getting some insight by the end. But it's like when he goes and tries to redeem himself by painting, Rourke's like, I'm sorry, it's too late. And I think this is one of the things that makes the Fountainhead more profound and interesting than Atlas Shrugged, because in Atlas Shrugged, the villains have really no redeeming qualities. Whereas Peter Keating is a complicated creature. He has a lot of evil and a lot of potential in him, and he consistently thwarts what's good in him because he thinks that's what he's supposed to do. But I think
that's a really
Keating...
good point. That it's different. The Fountainhead is told in a different style because it does have complicated characters. I think part of the power of the Fountainhead is it's got at least 3 characters which are just heartbreakingly tragic, which is Gail Wynan, Peter Keating, and the woman which Robert just mentioned. I forget her name.
Yeah, Katie.
But I would also say that this is artistic license on Ayn Rand's part, and it's not necessarily realistic. I think in real life, it would have been possible for Peter Keating to give up his career, which he doesn't like, and he could have become a painter. He could have started in his 40s. It would have been possible for Gail Wynan in real life to give up his newspaper career and do whatever he wants to do, such as maybe, since he's into art so much, maybe he can run